It was a bright, sunny morning in the quiet little neighborhood where Sarah lived. Birds were chirping, the grass looked green and freshly cut, and everything seemed peaceful. Sarah loved her house. She had spent years making her lawn look perfect. Flowers lined the edges, the grass was soft, and a small stone path led to the front door. To her, it was more than just a yard, it was her pride. But peace in a neighborhood like this was fragile. And Sarah was about to learn that the quiet streets hid more trouble than she expected. It started one ordinary morning. Sarah stepped outside to water her flowers, enjoying the smell of fresh soil and blooming roses. That's when she noticed her neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, walking across her lawn. Not through the gate or the sidewalkway, right across the middle of it. "Excuse me," Sarah called politely. "You can't walk on my lawn." Mrs. Thompson didn't even look up. "Oh, don't be silly. It's just a little grass," she said with a dismissive wave, stepping over a patch of tulips. Sarah felt her stomach twist. She had spent hours planting those tulips, carefully arranging them. "Please," Sarah said again, "this is my property. You need to stay on your side." Mrs. Thompson laughed softly. "Property lines? Oh, don't be so uptight. It's just a small yard. I'm not hurting anything." And with that, she turned and walked back to her house, leaving Sarah standing there, fuming. At first, Sarah tried to ignore it. Maybe it was a one-time thing. But the next day, it happened again. And then the day after. Each time, Mrs. Thompson found a new reason to wander across the lawn, checking the mailbox, picking up fallen leaves, or sometimes just standing there and talking loudly on the phone, right in Sarah's yard. Sarah started noticing other things too. Broken flowers, footprints in the freshly watered soil, and even a small bird feeder knocked over. It felt deliberate. Like Mrs. Thompson was testing her patience, one small step at a time. She thought about talking to the HOA, the Homeowners Association, but every time she started the complaint form, she hesitated. Mrs. Thompson was a respected member of the HOA, always polite at meetings, smiling and waving at everyone. Who would believe that she was causing trouble behind that friendly smile? One evening, after another long day at work, Sarah came home and stepped onto her front porch. That's when she saw it, Mrs. Thompson standing in her yard again, this time holding a bag of fertilizer. "Mrs. Thompson!" Sarah shouted. "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm just helping your grass," Mrs. Thompson said sweetly. "It looked a little dry, so I thought I'd give it some fertilizer." Sarah felt her patience snap. "I don't need your help. This is my lawn. You can't just..." But Mrs. Thompson was already walking back toward her own house, smiling as if nothing had happened. Sarah wanted to scream, but she didn't. Instead, she felt something else, an idea beginning to form in her mind. She realized that this wasn't going to stop on its own. Polite requests didn't work. Complaining to the HOA might take weeks, and by then, her lawn could be ruined. No, she needed to handle this herself. She needed a plan. The next morning, Sarah watched Mrs. Thompson through the window. She saw the neighbor step across the line again, this time carrying a newspaper. Sarah decided to take a small step, something that wouldn't be dangerous, but would send a message. She took a piece of chalk and carefully drew a line along the edge of her yard. Bright white, clear, and impossible to ignore. Later, when Mrs. Thompson stepped over the line, Sarah shouted, "Stop. That's the property line." Mrs. Thompson looked down, then laughed. "Oh, a line? That's cute. But I'm just crossing a little bit. It's not a big deal." Sarah clenched her fists. She could feel her face getting hot. This wasn't just about the lawn anymore. It was about respect. Boundaries. Common sense. Days passed, and the situation grew worse. Mrs. Thompson began leaving random objects in Sarah's yard: garden gnomes, old chairs, even a small inflatable flamingo. Sarah would come home from work to find her lawn turned into a strange obstacle course. And every time she confronted Mrs. Thompson, she acted innocent, sweet, and polite. It was maddening. By the end of the week, Sarah realized something important: this wasn't just about trespassing. It was about power. Mrs. Thompson wanted to test her, see how far she could go without consequence. And Sarah knew she had to fight back, but in a smart way. Not with anger. Not with shouting. But with strategy. That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, looking at a notebook full of sketches and notes. She drew her lawn, marked every entry point, and wrote down every incident that had happened. She researched legal ways to protect her property, and even small, clever ideas to discourage trespassing without breaking the law. As she wrote, a determined smile spread across her face. She knew that Mrs. Thompson was about to learn that Sarah was not someone to be toyed with. And she also knew something else: the story had just begun. The first small act of trespassing had seemed harmless, almost silly. But the way Mrs. Thompson kept testing her was leading to something much bigger. Something that would not be forgotten. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet again. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. But inside Sarah's house, a plan was forming, a plan that would make her neighbor think twice before stepping onto her lawn again. Little did Sarah know, the next time Mrs. Thompson came onto her lawn, it wouldn't just be a small confrontation. It would be the start of a battle that would be clever, satisfying, and unforgettable. And that's where part 1 ends. The trouble had begun, and the stage was set. Sarah had never been the confrontational type. She liked quiet mornings, sipping tea on her porch, and listening to the birds. But after a week of Mrs. Thompson marching across her lawn, leaving footprints in her flower beds, and dropping random objects like some bizarre lawn art, Sarah realized polite words were useless. It was time to act. The morning was misty, the kind of fog that makes everything look like a secret world. Sarah stepped onto her porch and saw Mrs. Thompson again, her silhouette framed against the faint sunlight, walking straight toward the garden gnome Sarah had painstakingly placed near the tulips. Something snapped inside Sarah. She grabbed her shoes, stormed outside, and shouted, "Mrs. Thompson! Stop right there!" Mrs. Thompson froze mid-step, holding the gnome like it was a trophy. She turned slowly, a sweet smile plastered on her face. "Good morning, Sarah. Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Beautiful, yes, but not when you keep trampling my lawn." Sarah's voice shook with a mix of anger and disbelief. Mrs. Thompson tilted her head, like a cat observing a mouse. "Trampling? Oh, Sarah, it's just a little grass." "You're being dramatic." Sarah's hands clenched. She could see the smug glint in Mrs. Thompson's eyes. This was exactly what she wanted. She wanted Sarah flustered, upset, and unable to respond. But today, Sarah refused to give in. "I'm not being dramatic," Sarah said firmly. "This is my property. And you have no right to just walk across it whenever you feel like it. Not anymore." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Birds stopped chirping, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Mrs. Thompson laughed softly, a sound that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "Not anymore? My dear, it's just a neighborhood. We all share it, don't we?" But Sarah wasn't sharing. "Not this time. No. We don't share my yard. You need to respect my boundaries, or I'll make sure everyone knows about your little trespassing habit." Mrs. Thompson's smile didn't falter. Instead, it widened, almost chillingly. "Oh, Sarah, you think threats scare me? I've been part of this HOA for decades. People listen to me. Everyone likes me. What could you possibly do?" Sarah took a deep breath. She needed calm, precision, and a plan. "I don't need to scare you. I just need to make sure you understand that actions have consequences. Every step you take across this line has a price." Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Consequences? You mean legal action? Police? HOA complaints?" Sarah shook her head. "No. Something smarter. Something unforgettable." Mrs. Thompson tilted her head again, curiosity sparkling in her eyes. "Oh? And what might that be?" Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she went back inside her house, leaving Mrs. Thompson standing there, gnome in hand, puzzled and slightly uneasy. Inside, Sarah pulled out her notebook, the one she had started after the first week of trespassing. Every incident was recorded: footprints, broken flowers, strange objects left on the lawn. Every time Mrs. Thompson ignored boundaries. Every time Sarah had been polite and ignored the annoyance. It was a blueprint now, a roadmap for what she was about to do. As Sarah plotted, an idea began to form: a small, clever plan that didn't involve yelling, lawsuits, or drama. It was subtle, strategic, and guaranteed to make Mrs. Thompson think twice. The next day, Sarah prepared. She placed small markers along the lawn, invisible from a distance but noticeable if you walked through. Tiny cameras hidden among the flowers silently recorded every step. She even moved some of the gnomes back to their proper places, but with a twist: one gnome now had a hidden surprise inside. When Mrs. Thompson arrived that morning, carrying another bag of fertilizer like it was her personal duty, Sarah was ready. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," she said calmly, standing firmly near the sidewalk. Mrs. Thompson paused, surprised by Sarah's presence. "Good morning," she said cautiously. "Before you step onto my lawn," Sarah said, "I want to show you something." She pointed subtly to one of the markers. Mrs. Thompson squinted. "Oh, what's that?" she asked, stepping closer. "Just a little reminder," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "That this is my property. Every step you take is being watched, recorded, and noted. I hope you understand now." Mrs. Thompson laughed nervously, unsure if Sarah was joking. But then, Sarah's hidden cameras caught every movement, every step Mrs. Thompson made, as she slowly realized that Sarah wasn't bluffing. The tension in the air was thick. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was there, like electricity before a storm. Mrs. Thompson's confident smile faltered for the first time. And Sarah? She felt something she hadn't felt before: control. This was more than a confrontation. It was a shift. The balance of power had changed. Mrs. Thompson, the long-time, respected HOA neighbor who thought she could do whatever she wanted, was finally seeing a glimpse of the consequences of her actions. As Mrs. Thompson walked back to her house, muttering something under her breath, Sarah didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. Not yet. She knew this was only the beginning. The next steps, her plan, her small but clever revenge, were about to unfold. And deep down, Sarah felt a thrill. The stage was set. The battle lines had been drawn. The confrontation was over for now. But the war? That had just begun. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows across Sarah's perfectly trimmed lawn. The air smelled faintly of dew and freshly cut grass. But Sarah didn't notice any of it. Her mind was focused entirely on Mrs. Thompson. After the confrontation yesterday, Sarah felt a strange mix of satisfaction and excitement. For the first time, she realized that her neighbor wasn't untouchable. She had underestimated her, and that was about to change. Sarah had been planning something small, clever, and completely harmless, but unforgettable. She called it the first lesson. It wasn't about anger. It wasn't about yelling. It was about showing Mrs. Thompson that Sarah's lawn was off limits, and that disrespect had consequences. The plan was simple, but effective. Sarah had noticed Mrs. Thompson loved walking the same path through her tulips every morning. She also loved small details: gnomes, garden ornaments, even tiny stones that lined the flower beds. Sarah decided to turn those habits against her in the most surprising way possible. Early that morning, she placed a series of harmless but tricky obstacles along Mrs. Thompson's usual path. A few garden stakes that made a soft, startling noise when stepped on. A small sprinkling of flour along the stepping stones so that footprints would appear like ghostly warnings. And her secret weapon, a single inflatable flamingo positioned perfectly in the middle of the path. By 8 a.m., everything was ready. Sarah hid behind the curtains and waited. Sure enough, within minutes, Mrs. Thompson appeared, humming softly, carrying her usual bag of fertilizer. She walked toward the tulips, completely unaware of the traps waiting for her. The first step hit a garden stake. A soft clink echoed through the air. Mrs. Thompson jumped slightly, her eyes widening. What the? She muttered, scanning the lawn. The next step left ghostly white footprints in the flower. She froze, looked down at the bizarre patterns, and frowned. The flamingo came into view, standing proudly in the middle of her path. Her eyes went wide, and for the first time, she looked genuinely startled. Sarah couldn't help but smile from behind the curtain. The plan was working perfectly. Mrs. Thompson carefully navigated the path, her confident stride replaced by slow, cautious steps. Every movement was being recorded on Sarah's hidden cameras, and every small reaction was priceless. But the best moment came when Mrs. Thompson reached the edge of the tulips. She leaned down to adjust one of the small gnomes and pop, the garden stake tipped over with a tiny noise that made her jump again. She looked around nervously, realizing that the lawn wasn't just grass anymore. It was a minefield. Sarah watched, heart racing with quiet satisfaction. This was not mean-spirited. It was clever. Subtle. And it sent a clear message: no more trespassing. Mrs. Thompson finally made it across the tulips, muttering to herself about strange coincidences and weird lawn setups. Sarah waited a moment before stepping outside. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," she said sweetly, her tone calm but firm. "Did you notice anything different about the lawn today?" Mrs. Thompson turned sharply, her face slightly flushed. "Different? I don't know what you mean." "Everything seems fine," she said, though her eyes darted nervously across the flower beds. Sarah smiled. "Really?" "Because I noticed footprints. And some of the gnomes seem misplaced. Maybe it's just the wind, though." Her voice was calm, almost teasing. Mrs. Thompson's confident demeanor wavered. She gave a small, tight-lipped smile and muttered something about children playing tricks before retreating toward her own house. As the door shut, Sarah exhaled slowly, feeling a strange mix of relief and triumph. The first lesson had been delivered. No yelling. No threats. Just clever strategy and a clear warning that her lawn was off-limits. That afternoon, Sarah checked the hidden camera footage. Every jump, every startled glance, every nervous step was captured perfectly. She saved it in her notebook as a reminder: clever planning beats anger every time. But deep down, Sarah knew this was only the beginning. Mrs. Thompson would be more cautious now, but she wouldn't give up. And Sarah was ready. This first lesson had shown that she could defend herself without confrontation. A small smile tugged at Sarah's lips. The next lesson would be bigger, smarter, and even more unforgettable. But for now, the first victory was hers. Outside, the lawn looked peaceful, untouched, and innocent. But Sarah knew better. Every tulip, every gnome, every step along the path now held a story of clever revenge and quiet triumph. And somewhere in her neighbor's house, Mrs. Thompson was thinking, how did she do that? The war was far from over. But Sarah had made the first move, and it was one Mrs. Thompson would never forget. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wet grass. Sarah stood at her window, watching her lawn like a hawk. After the first lesson, everything had seemed calm, but she knew better. Peace in a neighborhood like hers was only temporary, and she had a feeling Mrs. Thompson wouldn't take it lying down. Sure enough, by mid-morning, it began. Sarah noticed subtle signs of retaliation. A small pile of leaves dumped on the edge of her flower bed. A few garden stones moved slightly out of place. Even the flamingo from yesterday was tipped over, lying awkwardly on its side. Someone had been here, she realized immediately. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. The battle had escalated. Mrs. Thompson was testing her, pushing back, and Sarah knew she had to respond, but carefully. Sarah stepped outside and examined the damage. The footprints were faint, but unmistakable. Whoever had come across the lawn knew they were being watched. It was a challenge, almost like a silent dare. Let's see how clever you really are. Sarah smiled. She liked a challenge. She spent the next hour carefully resetting everything. The gnomes, the flamingo, the flower patterns, they were all back in place, but this time, Sarah added subtle upgrades. A few stakes with soft, startling noises, strategically hidden behind flowers. small mirrors angled to catch movement, and a hidden water sprinkler set to activate with weight sensors along the main path. By noon, the trap was ready. Sarah hid behind the porch, peeking through the blinds, heart pounding with anticipation. She didn't have to wait long. Mrs. Thompson appeared, striding confidently toward the tulips, humming the same annoying tune she had yesterday. This time, however, Sarah noticed a difference. Mrs. Thompson moved more cautiously, looking around, suspicious. Her smug confidence had faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of unease. The first trap went off almost immediately, a hidden stake tipped with a soft clang. Mrs. Thompson jumped but recovered, muttering under her breath. Then, as she stepped on a weight sensor, the sprinkler activated, sending a sudden burst of water onto her shoes. She yelped, spinning around, clearly unprepared for the surprise. Sarah couldn't help but stifle a laugh. She had anticipated the retaliation, and her response was flawless. But she also knew this was only the beginning. Mrs. Thompson wouldn't stop here. The subtle warfare continued throughout the day. Sarah watched as her neighbor tiptoed across the lawn, trying to avoid every obstacle. She could see the frustration building with every step, every startled reaction. Her careful planning had turned Mrs. Thompson's daily routine into a cautious and unpredictable adventure. But then, the real escalation happened. That evening, Sarah discovered something even more daring, a note left on her porch. It read, "Nice tricks today. But don't think this ends here. You'll see soon." Sarah felt a thrill mixed with tension. Mrs. Thompson wasn't just reacting, she was plotting now. The note was small, almost polite, but the message was clear: this was war. That night, Sarah didn't sleep much. She studied her lawn, rechecked the hidden cameras, and brainstormed even cleverer strategies. The stakes had risen. It wasn't just about boundaries anymore. It was about strategy, observation, and staying one step ahead. The next morning, she added new elements to her plan, a series of harmless but startling scarecrow-like figures that would pop up from behind bushes, carefully timed sprinklers, and small motion-triggered noise devices hidden among the tulips. Every element was subtle, harmless, and perfectly designed to confuse and frustrate Mrs. Thompson without causing any damage. By the time Mrs. Thompson appeared again, Sarah was ready. She watched, hidden, as her neighbor approached the lawn, clearly unsure. The confident stride of yesterday was gone. She hesitated, glanced around nervously, and stepped cautiously. And then, one by one, the surprises went off. A stake tipped, sprinklers sprayed, and a hidden noise made her jump. Her face twisted in shock and mild frustration. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. The first lesson had worked, but the escalation had solidified the message: her lawn was not to be trespassed on, and clever planning could outsmart even the most stubborn opponent. By evening, Mrs. Thompson finally retreated, muttering, and glancing over her shoulder. The note had been an empty warning. The reality of Sarah's clever defenses was far more intimidating. Sarah stepped onto the lawn, inspecting the traps and devices. Everything worked perfectly. Her first lesson had been clever, but the escalation had shown real strategy and preparation. She knew the battle was far from over, but she had sent a clear message: Sarah was ready, and she would not back down. And somewhere behind her blinds, hidden cameras silently recorded every reaction, every frustrated glance, and every misstep. The footage would become a guide, a reminder, and perhaps a tool for even bigger, smarter moves. The escalation was real. The stakes had risen. And Sarah knew one thing for certain: the next move would be hers, and it would be unforgettable. The next morning, Sarah woke up earlier than usual. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. Birds chirped softly, and the streetlights flickered off one by one as the sun slowly rose. She brewed her coffee but didn't sit down. Today wasn't a day for sipping tea, it was a day for action. After the first lesson and the escalation, Sarah knew one thing: Mrs. Thompson wouldn't stop unless she experienced something unforgettable. It wasn't about anger anymore, it was about clever strategy, planning, and precision. Sarah pulled out her notebook and spread it across the kitchen table. Every incident was recorded: footprints, objects left on her lawn, notes, and subtle retaliations. She stared at the list for a long time, her mind racing. Then, slowly, a plan began to form. This wasn't going to be a prank. It wasn't going to be a small trick. It was going to be the perfect plan, something so clever, so subtle, that Mrs. Thompson would finally understand the consequences of trespassing. Sarah began preparing. She spent hours placing devices along the lawn, motion-activated sprinklers in unexpected spots, small markers disguised as flowers to alert her if anyone stepped over, and hidden cameras angled to capture every move. She even created a small maze with the garden gnomes and stones, making it impossible for anyone to walk through without triggering one of her clever surprises. But the real genius of the plan was psychological. Sarah didn't just want to stop Mrs. Thompson physically, she wanted to make her doubt every step she took, feel cautious, and think twice before even approaching the lawn again. By late afternoon, everything was ready. Sarah sat on her porch, pretending to read a book, while her eyes constantly scanned the lawn. She saw a familiar figure approaching. Mrs. Thompson. Her posture was tense, her confident stride gone. She moved slowly, almost tiptoeing, clearly unsure of what awaited her. Sarah held her breath as the neighbor stepped into the first trap. A soft noise popped from behind a bush. Mrs. Thompson jumped, spinning around, eyes wide. Then the sprinklers activated, giving her a quick, unexpected shower. She stumbled, muttering under her breath, clearly unnerved. Next, as she tried to navigate the gnome maze, the mirrors Sarah had placed reflected sunlight directly into her eyes. She squinted, covering her face, completely disoriented. Every move triggered something new, a soft clang here, a subtle shift there, and every reaction was captured on Sarah's hidden cameras. It was perfect. Sarah didn't intervene. She didn't shout. She simply watched, letting the plan unfold naturally. Mrs. Thompson's frustration grew with every step, her confidence crumbling. She tried to retreat, but each route triggered another minor surprise, reinforcing Sarah's point: this lawn was off limits. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mrs. Thompson reached the edge of the lawn, her face pale and her voice small. "Okay. I get it," she muttered, brushing off water and dust. I won't step on your lawn again." Sarah stood up slowly, smiling but keeping her tone calm. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I appreciate it. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't mean. It was precise, clever, and unforgettable. The perfect plan had worked." Mrs. Thompson's smugness was gone, replaced with a careful caution that hadn't existed before. That evening, Sarah reviewed the footage. Every startled glance, every jump, every moment of hesitation, it was all there, a record of clever strategy winning without confrontation. She felt a strange mix of satisfaction and amusement. But Sarah also knew this wasn't the end of the story. The perfect plan had worked, but it had also shown her what she was capable of. She realized that sometimes intelligence and creativity were more powerful than anger or aggression. Outside, the lawn looked calm again, innocent and peaceful. But it was a battlefield that Sarah had won with precision and patience. And somewhere in her neighbor's house, Mrs. Thompson sat quietly, thinking, I shouldn't have messed with her. The stage was set for the final moves. Sarah had taught the perfect lesson, but the war of wits was far from over. And she couldn't wait to see what would happen next. The sun had just begun to dip behind the trees, casting long, eerie shadows across Sarah's lawn. The air was thick with tension, and even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. Today wasn't just another morning. Today was the day of the showdown, the moment Mrs. Thompson would finally face the full force of Sarah's clever strategy. Sarah stood behind her curtain, peeking out. Every device, every subtle trap, every detail of her plan was in place. She had spent days perfecting it: the sprinklers, the gnome maze, motion-activated sounds, mirrors reflecting sunlight, even the invisible markers along the grass. It wasn't cruel, it was genius. And it wasn't just about stopping Mrs. Thompson. It was about teaching her once and for all that boundaries exist for a reason. From the corner of her eye, Sarah saw Mrs. Thompson approaching. She moved cautiously this time, her usual arrogance replaced with nervous calculation. Sarah noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she held her bag of fertilizer like a shield. Sarah took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "This is it." As Mrs. Thompson stepped onto the lawn, the first subtle surprise activated a gentle clang from a hidden stake behind a bush. She jumped, startled, and muttered, "What?" Before she could regain her composure, the sprinklers triggered, a precise burst of water drenching her shoes. She stumbled, her face registering disbelief and growing frustration. Every step now seemed calculated, hesitant, like walking through a minefield she didn't know existed. Sarah held back a laugh but didn't intervene. She let the plan unfold. Next, Mrs. Thompson approached the gnome maze. The small statues, placed perfectly in a zigzag pattern, forced her to zigzag as well. Hidden motion-triggered noises from the bushes startled her every few steps, a bird call here, a soft metallic clink there. Her confident stride vanished completely. The mirrors Sarah had positioned reflected sunlight directly into Mrs. Thompson's eyes at just the right angles, causing her to squint and flinch repeatedly. Every reaction was being captured on Sarah's cameras, recording not just proof, but the complete psychology of someone learning a lesson the clever way. Then came the final touch, the invisible line markers Sarah had set along the far edge of the lawn. As Mrs. Thompson reached the end, a small mechanical device suddenly raised a garden stake with a soft pop, stopping her dead in her tracks. Her eyes widened as she finally realized Sarah had anticipated every possible path, every move, every reaction. "Enough!" Mrs. Thompson exclaimed, her voice trembling slightly. I give up." Sarah stepped out onto her porch, calm but commanding. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I appreciate it. I just wanted you to understand my lawn is my property. That's all." Mrs. Thompson's face went pale. Her arrogance, her smug confidence, even her subtle attempts at intimidation, they were gone. She looked at Sarah with something she hadn't shown before, respect. And maybe a little fear. But the best part wasn't just the physical outcome. It was the mental victory. Mrs. Thompson now hesitated with every move on Sarah's lawn, aware that clever planning and patience could outsmart even the most overconfident neighbor. Sarah watched as her neighbor retreated toward her house, shoulders hunched slightly, muttering under her breath. Every reaction had been captured, every step analyzed, every lesson learned. The showdown was complete. Sarah didn't gloat. She didn't laugh out loud. Instead, she walked across her lawn, inspecting each trap, each subtle device, ensuring nothing had malfunctioned. She felt calm, satisfied, and a little amused. The sun had set completely now, leaving a golden glow on the tips of the grass. The neighborhood was quiet again, but Sarah knew this was a turning point. She had won the perfect showdown, not through anger, not through yelling, but through patience, cleverness, and precise strategy. And somewhere inside Mrs. Thompson's house, she was thinking the same thing Sarah felt: I shouldn't have underestimated her. The showdown was over, but the story was almost complete. Sarah had proven her point, established her boundaries, and taught a lesson Mrs. Thompson would never forget. Tomorrow, the lawn would be peaceful again. But tonight, the memory of the clever, calculated showdown would linger in the air, a silent reminder of strategy, patience, and intelligence winning over arrogance. The next morning, the neighborhood was quiet again. Birds chirped softly, the sun cast a warm glow over Sarah's perfectly trimmed lawn, and everything looked peaceful. But peace now carried a different meaning. This wasn't just calm, it was earned calm. Sarah stepped outside, coffee in hand, and looked over her lawn. The tulips swayed gently, the gnomes stood proudly, and even the little flamingo seemed to tilt as if nodding in approval. Everything was in its place, untouched, unchallenged. The traps were gone now, disassembled carefully, and put away. There was no sign of yesterday's chaos except the invisible memory of the lesson delivered. Across the street, Sarah saw Mrs. Thompson peeking through her curtains. Her expression was a mix of caution, respect, and something almost humbled. For the first time, Sarah noticed that her neighbor seemed smaller, not physically, of course, but in confidence. The arrogance, the smugness, the careless attitude, it had all faded. Sarah smiled quietly to herself. The showdown had been more than just a clever prank or a small victory. It was a demonstration: boundaries mattered, patience worked, and intelligence could win over brute confidence. Later that day, Sarah checked her notebook, reviewing every detail: footprints, camera footage, even Mrs. Thompson's startled reactions. She realized how much she had learned in the process. Patience, observation, and creativity could solve problems without anger. Cleverness could outsmart rudeness. And sometimes, the best victories were quiet, subtle, and unforgettable. The most satisfying part was watching the change. Mrs. Thompson no longer strode across the lawn with arrogance. Instead, she now carefully stepped along the sidewalk, avoiding the flower beds entirely. The small gestures, the careful movements, told Sarah everything she needed to know. The lesson had been understood. But Sarah also knew that respect wasn't just about rules or tricks, it was about empathy. The first lessons had been clever, the escalation strategic, the showdown unforgettable, but the final lesson was the balance of fairness and intelligence. She had proven her point without causing real harm, and that mattered most. That evening, Sarah walked across her lawn, barefoot this time, feeling the soft grass under her feet. She remembered the week of frustration, the sneaky tricks, the clever traps, but mostly, she remembered the sense of satisfaction that comes from standing up for yourself while keeping your integrity intact. A small smile tugged at her lips. Somewhere nearby, Mrs. Thompson peeked out again, this time with a polite wave instead of a smirk or a challenge. Sarah waved back. No words were needed. The message had been sent and received. Boundaries were respected, and the clever victory was complete. As Sarah sat on her porch that night, sipping her tea, she reflected on the journey. The trouble had begun with a simple trespass, but it ended with something bigger, a quiet triumph of wit, strategy, and patience over arrogance and carelessness. Outside, the neighborhood lights twinkled, the wind rustled gently through the trees, and her lawn looked calm, innocent, and untouchable. But Sarah knew better. This calm was earned. The lesson had been learned. And somewhere in her mind, Sarah felt a spark of amusement, realizing one important truth: clever planning, patience, and a little creativity could turn even the most annoying problem into an unforgettable victory. For Sarah, the battle was over. But the story and the memory of that clever showdown would linger in her neighborhood forever. The lawn was hers. The lesson was learned. And Sarah had won not with anger, not with confrontation, but with wit, patience, and intelligence.